Hello, Internet, and welcome to another edition of Movies Are Boring. This is the web show where two defense journalists sit and talk about pop culture and the movies. My name is Matthew Galt. With me, as always, is my co-host, the man, the myth, the beard, Kevin Nodell. Say hello, Kevin.
Hello, Kevin.
I'm very excited today because today we are talking about a movie that Kevin and I first discussed when we talked about the idea of doing Movies Are Boring in general. This is one of the very first movies that we kind of threw out there that we wanted to do. It is also probably our most requested movie from you guys, the viewers. So today, without further ado, we are going to talk about the 2001 Oscar award-winning film for Best Foreign Feature, No Man's Land. It is set in the Bosnian War, which happened in the mid-90s. It follows that conflict a little bit. It's a horrifying mess of a dark comedy. It's a beautiful film, the one that's very tragic and sad and funny, and you feel bad for laughing at it at the same time. Kevin, would you kind of agree with me on that?
I would, because it's classed as a comedy, and it is funny when it's trying to be funny, but it is a very dark, very underhanded, very subtle sort of humor.
Right.
It's kind of like the latter seasons of MASH in a way, but like really late MASH, where you're not sure if it's actually funny anymore.
Yeah, it's just kind of Alan Alda walking around monologuing without any jokes.
Right.
Okay, so the plot of this movie is, and Kevin, help me out here if I screw up any of the particulars.
Okay.
You're kind of at the front lines. There's the Bosnian side of the conflict and the Serbian side of the conflict, and the Bosnians have sent a relief squad in, and you're following this relief squad. They're trying to join the front. They get lost in the fog. It's nighttime. They decide to go to sleep. They're going to sleep. They're going to get up in the morning and wait for the fog to clear. They get up in the morning, the fog clears, and they're right on the Serbian line. The Serbians are staring right at them, and the Serbians unload. They just unload. They kill almost all of them. One of the main characters, Cheeky, I believe is his name, dives into a trench that's in the middle of the no man's land between the lines. He's wounded, and he sits there. So the Serbians decide that they need to go into the trench to clear it out to make sure that there's nobody left, everyone's dead, nothing bad is, that nobody's going to come after them. So they send two guys in there. One of them is the other main character named Nino. They go into the trench. Nino's companion, whose name you never learn, dies, and then Cheeky and Nino are kind of in this trench together, a Serb and a Bosnian, basically in the most horrifying standoff that you could imagine. Both sides are staring at them, the UN gets involved, and everything gets kind of progressively worse as the movie continues. And that's kind of the setup for it. That's the world that we find ourselves in this film. So what did you think of the movie, Kevin, overall?
I mean, like you said, it's tragic, it's funny, it's a beautiful movie. It's interesting, and this is another detail about the production of it. The director and writer, whose name escapes me, actually was a member of
It's Danis Tanovich is the name of the director. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm forced to assume that this is partially based on some of his experiences. I mean, highly fictionalized, but I did some research on him, and he had actually got a lot of his filming experience following Bosnian troops during the war as a journalist, which lends a kind of credibility to this film that it might have otherwise been lacking.
No, absolutely.
But the other thing that's particularly fascinating about that is, and because he was following around the Bosnians, and he said in his Oscar acceptance speech, "This is for my country." It's not a glorious story of his country.
No, it's absolutely not.
And it doesn't really. It sort of takes the Bosnian side nominally, I would say, but they don't make the Serbs monstrous, And they definitely don't make the Bosniak soldiers seem like ultra heroic in any particular way.
Uh,
The whole thing and everybody and for everyone involved is just kind of depicted as tragic.
Tragic and kind of selfish and unkempt. Like no one, it felt like even nobody really knows why they're there, and anyone that knows why they're there, and this is including the journalists that are watching the scene and the UN, which we'll have a lively discussion about, I'm sure, here in a minute.
Right.
Everyone's just kind of hanging out. There's a great scene where the UN is getting involved because they've learned that there's these two guys in a trench that don't want to be there, essentially. And they kind of roll up on the, I believe it's the Serbian line, and
Yeah.
the Serbian leader is just kind of, he's a larger gentleman. He's passed out napping while a child plays the accordion next to him. It's very surreal and funny. It's not like both of the sides of both forces in the military are not, like you said, are not depicted heroically. They're just kind of dudes hanging out, shooting at each other every now and then. And they've got AKs and artillery. But the comedy of the thing is just that everyone's confusion and no one knows what the right thing to do is in this situation.
I also, and that scene that you're mentioning in particular, when they're trying to gain entry to the lines, and it's interesting that they kind of cast people are based around their nationality, so everybody's just kind of speaking their own language during the film with subtitles. They don't try to do the everybody speaks English or everybody speaks one language so that the audience can understand. It's everybody speaking their own language and very hazily trying to communicate with one another and speaking through intermediaries.
Yeah,
and I like that
the
scene because the peacekeeper saying, does anybody here speak French? No. English? And they say yes, but they're lying because they don't actually speak English either. They only know how to say yes, yes.
Yeah, and he's that's all they say in English is just yes, yes, and one of the soldiers turns to his boss and says, just say yes, yes until they go away in English. Just keep repeating it. I didn't thought about that, but you're right. There are, because there's a German. There's the UN has a German, a French, several French officers, and the English, the British guy, and they all speak their own language and kind of communicate to each other in English. And I kind of liked that they did that because it just adds to the confusion that no one knows kind of what's going on here. Let's talk about. I know that we had talked about in a previous, I believe it's the Shake Hands with the Devil. We talked about kind of the way the UN and the UN peacekeepers are portrayed in film.
Yeah, this actually reminded me a lot of Shake Hands with the Devil also, though this is a funnier, lighter take on Shake Hands with the Devil, I guess.
Well, just a great joke in this was they were I think it's behind the Serbian lines. One of the guys is reading.
It was the
Bosnian line. Okay.
Yeah.
Behind the Bosnian lines, one of the guys is reading a newspaper and he's making noises, and his comrade turns to him. He's like, "What's wrong?" He's like, "Just Rwanda. What a mess." That's the kind of humor that's in this movie. Anyway, sorry. Keep talking about the UN peacekeepers before in this.
Oh no! Interestingly, I would say that, and I was surprised at this. I think not necessarily the officers, but the peacekeeping soldiers are probably the ones who are depicted most positively. I would say, I think the bomb disposal expert and also the French squad is depicted, I think, fairly well. Not necessarily heroically, but in a more sympathetic light than I think some of the other characters are portrayed, which I find sort of interesting.
Why do you find it interesting?
Well, particularly because this is written and directed by Bosnians, and people. I mean, the UN generally had the reputation of doing nothing and not caring, and the UN as an organization is very much depicted in that way. But I was just kind of surprised at how much humanity they gave the Peacekeepers and how they were able to really capture that frustration they were feeling. I think the frustration really comes through.
Because you've got these in the film. There's these two guys are trapped in the middle, and I'll go ahead and throw this other bit out there. When the Serbians got down into the survivors, they pulled one of the ostensibly dead bodies into the trench and then put a bouncing mine under him. The idea being that when the Bosnians would come and retrieve their dead, more dead would be created because they'd move a body and a mine would go off. Well, a little bit into the film, the Bosnian that they had rigged to, or Bosniak that they had rigged to explode, wakes up and he's not dead. And now he's alive with a really unpleasant mine underneath him. And so that's part of the reason that the UN is even getting involved, because you've got the Serbian and the Bosnian line staring at each other. They see their two soldiers in there. They're like waving and saying, like, no, please, we need to get back to our lines, don't shoot us. And they also find out that there's a mined Bosniak down in the trench. And so the UN is trying to figure out what to do about this mess. And at first, the UN says, the UN commanders say, we don't want to get involved. This isn't our fight. We're just here to watch and make sure that nothing bad happens. Well, the soldiers on the ground, like Kevin said, they want to help. They want to do something. One of them there's a great line from one of them where he says that when people are killing each other, trying to remain neutral is picking a side. Doing nothing is making a choice, and it's not the right thing to do. So yeah, I hadn't considered that. I'd kind of seen them as goofy all the way through. But you're right. Like there's a big contrast between basically anyone in leadership in this movie and people that are actually fighting the conflict, right?
Right. And I think it was a very specific choice to make the kind of lead peacekeeper that it focused on a sergeant, a non-commissioned officer, rather than an officer. I think that was a very specific choice by the filmmakers to make him more on the ground and more focused on what's actually happening.
What did you think of the British UN?
That's kind of where, and that's kind of why I mentioned MASH, because
okay.
I felt the depiction of that character and the character that was very clearly his mistress all felt very.
It was very MASH. Yeah, I didn't.
Very
yes,
absurd,
I considered
very
that.
MASH.
There is a was he was a general, right?
A colonel.
He was a colonel. Okay. There's a British UN colonel that's kind of made to seem like he's in charge of this whole operation, and he's very removed. They're in Croatia, right? I believe.
Something like that.
Yeah, he's taking phone calls and trying to trying to get them to just basically stay away from the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And throughout the entire time, anytime he's on camera, he has a blonde, buxom assistant that doesn't say much. That kind of follows him around and fusses with him, and it's very obvious that their relationship is not platonic. And that was, again, just kind of one of the little subtle bits of comedy in this movie that I really enjoyed. So, Kevin, can you explain, to give context to this film, can you explain this conflict to us? Because I've always felt that this is one of the messiest, more confusing modern recent conflicts.
You want me to explain the Balkan conflict here?
As much as you possibly can.
Oh, Jesus Christ! Where do we start with the Balkans? Okay, well, it starts with Yugoslavia.
Okay.
Big old Eastern European country, post World War I created nation. Not exactly an area where everybody gets along. A lot of ethnic groups were kind of slammed together in one country.
Okay.
We've never seen anything like that happen before in the world.
Right. It's just so bizarre.
But anyway, after World War II, guerrilla leader Tito, a communist, took control of the country and was basically the dictator of that country for several years and kept it together. Though a dictator, he's generally pretty well regarded as being even-handed and treated, though being mean and kind of cruel with people, being equally mean and cruel to all the ethnic groups is something that he was sort of given credit for, I suppose. But after his death, and after the collapse of the Soviet Union, all the different ethnic groups started scrambling and saying, hey, we don't want to be in Yugoslavia anymore. We want our own kind of countries. And Serbia was kind of notorious for kind of wanting to keep lots of territory for itself that some of these other groups believed were theirs, and also they just wanted their own country. And Bosnia was one of those.
Right. Just the push for Greater Serbia, I guess.
Right.
Right. Okay. So, like we were talking about right before the video, Slobodan Milosevic was
president of Serbia.
Right, and was one of the unpleasant characters who was tried for war crimes, or was about to be tried for war crimes in The Hague when he died in 2006. And also, timely, prosecutors have, out of The Hague today, have wrapped up their case against Karadzic, who was a Bosnian Serb leader.
Who makes a cameo in this film through archival footage. He
does. He is seen delivering rhetoric loudly, it was interesting to see pictures of him today, and then. The other thing I wanted to talk about was the way that the media is portrayed in this.
I would love to talk about that.
There is, I believe it's Jane Livingston, who works for what I felt was very much like a CNN analog, like a global news channel.
Well, I took her as being more of a member of the British press than like CNN.
More like a BBC, you think?
Like BBC yeah, and that's kind of the impression I got, that she was more that line. Because all of her bosses back in wherever their studio were all had British accents too.
Yes. Okay. So she works for a global news agency, and she is very interested in getting the story, perhaps to the detriment of the people around her. What did you think of her character and the other press?
I think she was portrayed. She was an interesting character because she wasn't portrayed entirely negatively.
Mm-hmm.
But it was definitely apparent that she was arrogant and had an ego and her own sort of desire to get the story. And I think it shows when she tries to interview the people in the trench. And that's kind of... You feel some sympathy for her, but you also realize that she's asking really insensitive, really not helpful questions. And that's also why they refuse to answer them.
Where she walks up to Nina, who's the Serbian in the trench, and offers him a cigarette. He takes it, and then right out the gate she says, "So were you the one that put the mine under this guy?" And he throws the cigarette down, and it says some unpleasant things to her, and then walks away.
He doesn't say anything. He just gives her the finger and steps back.
I apologize. It was the other guy that said some unpleasant things. It was Cheeky.
Mm-hmm.
There was a great, when they're leaving, and I don't want to spoil the very end of this movie, because I want people to watch it. But I loved when they're leaving, and her cameraman says, "Do you want to get some shots of the trench?" She's like, "A trench is a trench. They're all the same." Which I thought was kind of a beautiful and sad coda for the movie in general.
Oh no, and that's what's interesting about her. It's not as though she's so detached to not care about the war, but she's very jaded.
Right, and she does get excited whenever something bad is happening. Like there's a great scene where she's kind of she knows that she's about to get the story, and she's pushing the UN a little bit because she's been listening in on their radio communications, and they're waiting. The UN guys are waiting to hear back from their bosses to see if they're going to go down there and allow the reporters down there. And you see, there's just a camera shot of her legs with her foot twitching. You know, just can barely contain herself. I thought that was just very well done. The whole movie is very, very well done. I liked it quite a bit. This is actually the you'd never seen this before, right?
No, I've been familiar with it for years and always wanted to see it, and this just gave me the excuse to finally go ahead and see it, which I'm glad I did.
This was the first. I think this was the first foreign movie I saw in a theater. They just opened like a nice art house theater near where I lived back in. This came out in 2001, so you know over a decade ago, and I was in high school, and a girl told me like you have to go see this movie. You've never seen anything like it. So crazy, and yeah, it was. And it stuck with me the entire time. I remember vividly the very last shot. I remember vividly. It was interesting to see it again, knowing a little bit more and having a bit more of the context. It was funnier and sadder somehow, and everyone should absolutely see it. Do you have anything else to add, Mr. Nodell?
No, I don't. It's that I just really agree with you. It's a phenomenal movie. It almost makes genocide funny, except that it doesn't. And it's definitely something people should see.
Yeah, you can obviously buy the DVD on Amazon. It's not on Netflix, unfortunately, but you can rent it on Amazon. Their streaming service. It's a couple bucks. You should definitely sit down and check it out. It is well worth your time. So, for Movies Are Boring, I am Matthew Galt. This is my co-host Kevin Nodell, signing off. We will be back in October. We have a special treat for you. We are going to be looking at some of the horror movies that are also war movies. Kevin, what was one of the ones that we were going to take a look at?
I think the one that we've been talking about most seriously is The Bunker, which is a British indie film about a bunch of German soldiers who take cover in a bunker, if you can imagine, and they find out very quickly that it's haunted.
All right, so look forward to that. You should get that here in the coming weeks. Please click subscribe. Please go to War is Boring and read more of our stories. We are trying very hard to bring you the kind of news and information that you aren't getting anywhere else. Again, my name is Matthew Galt. With me, as always, is Kevin Nodell, and we will see you guys next time. Thank you for watching.